I stood at the entrance of the Whitmore Estate's grand dining room, watching my mother raise her champagne glass for a toast. 23 years old, alive for the second time, and they still didn't know my name. To my darling daughters, Victoria and my mother's Botoxed forehead attempted a frown as she looked directly at me. Oh, what is it again? Sarah? Susan? It's Cassandra, Mother, Victoria said with barely concealed amusement, not bothering to look at me. Has been for 23 years. Right, right. To Victoria and Cassandra. But I smiled, because my name wasn't Cassandra anymore. It was Arya Chen, my mother's maiden name, legally changed 3 months ago with documentation they'd never seen. And in 6 weeks, when the reading of Grandmother Eleanor's will occurred, they were going to find out exactly what forgetting my name had cost them. Because I'd already lived through this dinner once before. I'd already died in a hospital room alone at 25, with none of them even knowing I was sick. And Grandmother's will had left everything to Cassandra Marie Whitmore, a name that wouldn't exist anymore when the lawyers came calling. This time, I was taking it all. The first time I lived this life, I died on a Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic. There was no family gathered around my bedside, no tearful goodbyes. I'd collapsed in my studio apartment, the one I'd rented in the worst part of town because it was all I could afford on my teacher's salary. From an aneurysm the doctor said I'd probably had since birth. By the time my landlord found me 3 days later, I'd already been gone for 2. My funeral had 12 people. 6 were from the school where I taught. 3 were former foster families who'd actually remembered me. 2 were my mother's assistants, sent to represent the family because the Whitmores were too busy. 1 was the funeral director. Not a single member of my actual family attended. I learned this because I'd watched the whole thing. Not from heaven or as a ghost. I don't know what that liminal space was. But I'd seen everything. I'd watched my mother take a call during the moment of silence, discussing catering for Victoria's engagement party. I'd watched my father sign the cremation papers without reading them, without even asking what happened to me. I'd watched my brother Marcus tell his girlfriend that he had a sister or something, but they weren't close. Had a sister, past tense. 3 days dead, and I was already past tense. The worst part? Grandmother Eleanor had died 2 weeks before me. Massive heart attack, very sudden. The will reading had been scheduled for the month after her funeral. I died before it happened. But in that strange space between death and whatever came next, I'd seen that reading. I'd watched Victoria's face go from smug satisfaction to confused rage. Because Grandmother Eleanor, the steel magnolia who'd built a tech empire in the 70s when women were barely allowed in boardrooms, had left everything to me. Not split between the grandchildren, not divided among her children. Everything to my darling Cassandra Marie Whitmore, the only one who visited me every Sunday without being asked. 50 million in liquid assets. The Whitmore Technologies stock's worth another 200 million. The estate in Connecticut. The penthouse in Manhattan. The villa in Tuscany. The art collection worth 40 million alone. All of it to me. My mother had contested it immediately. My father had hired a team of lawyers. But Grandmother's will was ironclad, witnessed by 3 attorneys and a judge. She'd been of sound mind, had passed every evaluation. The estate was mine by law. Except I was dead. And in my state, when a beneficiary dies before receiving their inheritance and has no will of their own, everything goes to their next of kin. My parents. The same parents who forgot my name, who forgot my birthday, who forgot I existed unless they needed someone to blame for something. I'd watched them collect my grandmother's empire. I'd watched Victoria get a $50 million trust fund as compensation for the emotional distress of almost losing her inheritance. I'd watched Marcus get the penthouse. I'd watched them sell the Connecticut estate and split the proceeds. I'd watched them never mention my name again. And then I'd woken up on my 18th birthday, 5 years before my death, with every memory intact. The morning I woke up in my childhood bedroom at the Whitmore estate, I'd actually screamed. Not from fear, from rage, because I recognized this day. March 15th, 5 years before my death. My 18th birthday. the day no one remembered. I'd spent my first 18th birthday waiting for someone to say something, waiting for a card, a call, hey, you're legally an adult now. Nothing came. Victoria had been 21 and in Milan for Fashion Week with mother. Father had been in Tokyo for a merger. Marcus had been at Yale, probably high at some fraternity party. The house staff had been the only ones who said anything. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, who I'd later learn was my maternal grandmother's sister, making her my great-aunt by blood, though the family never acknowledged it, had made me a small cake. She was the only one who always remembered. "Miss Cassandra," she'd whispered, pressing an envelope into my hands. "This is from your grandmother, Eleanor. She made me promise to give it to you on your 18th birthday, no matter what." Inside had been a check for $50,000 and a note. "For your escape fund. Leave this house, darling. They will drain you dry." The first time around, I'd cried and hidden the check, too afraid to use it, too guilty about leaving grandmother, even though she was essentially telling me to go. I'd stayed in this house until I graduated college, working part-time jobs because my allowance was routinely forgotten. Watching Victoria get a new Mercedes for Christmas while I got a gift card to Target that had already been used. Not this time. This time, I got out of bed, marched downstairs, and found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen. When she handed me the envelope exactly as I remembered, I hugged her so tightly she gasped. "Mrs. Chen," I said. "Auntie, I know who you are." Her face went pale. "Miss Cassandra, I don't—" "Eleanor Chen was your sister. My grandmother on my mother's side. Mother erased your whole family from the record when she married father because they were just restaurant owners and not good enough for the Whitmore name. I'd learned all this in my death space, watching the past unspool. You're my great aunt, and you've been the only person in this house who ever treated me like I mattered." Tears rolled down Ms. Chen's weathered face. "You know." "I know everything." I grabbed her hands. "And I need your help. In 7 years, grandmother Eleanor is going to die and leave me everything, but I'm going to die 2 weeks later, before I can inherit. And then they'll get it all." "How could you possibly know?" "Because I've lived it already." The words sounded insane. But Mrs. Chen, Auntie Chen, just looked at me with ancient, knowing eyes. She was 73 years old and had seen enough in her life to believe in stranger things than rebirth. "Then we change it," she said simply. "What do you need?" "Everything about Mother's family, everything she buried, and I need to cash this check and disappear for a while." I spent the next 5 years becoming someone else. First, I left the Whitmore estate that very night with one suitcase and grandmother Eleanor's check. I enrolled in NYU under my full legal name, Cassandra Marie Whitmore. But I told everyone to call me Cass. I worked 2 jobs and invested every penny I didn't need for survival. Auntie Chen had given me a folder full of documents about my mother's family, and I'd spent my first semester learning everything. My mother, Melissa Chen, was the daughter of Eleanor and David Chen, who'd owned Chen's Golden Dragon, a wildly successful restaurant chain in the 70s and 80s. Eleanor Chen was a programming genius who'd met David at Berkeley, and together they'd built not just restaurants, but one of the first restaurant management software systems. That software became the foundation for Whitmore Technologies after Eleanor married it into the Whitmore family through my mother's marriage to my father, Robert Whitmore. Robert Whitmore had been a failed investment banker when he met my mother. The Whitmore family name had money once, but Robert's grandfather had gambled most of it away. Robert married Melissa for her mother's empire, and Eleanor, wanting her daughter to be happy, had folded her company into the Whitmore name as a wedding gift. Then Robert had systematically erased the Chen name from everything. Eleanor Chen became Eleanor Whitmore. In all documents, the software patents were transferred to Whitmore Technologies. The restaurants were rebranded or sold. My mother, desperate for her husband's approval and acceptance into old money society, had helped him do it. But Eleanor never forgot, and she'd never forgiven. I learned all this while double majoring in business and computer science. I graduated in 3 years instead of 4, summa cum laude. I'd spent my first life as a teacher because I'd genuinely loved teaching, but I'd also done it because I'd never thought I was smart enough for anything else. The Whitmores had spent my childhood telling me I was the slow one, the average one, the one who tried her best but just wasn't exceptional like Victoria. Turns out, when you're not being emotionally abused and gaslighted daily, you can actually focus on learning. By the time I was 21, I had a portfolio worth $300,000 from aggressive cryptocurrency investments. I remembered which ones would explode, and I'd started my own consulting company helping restaurants optimize their operations. I called it Golden Dragon Solutions. A little homage to my real family. And I'd started visiting grandmother Eleanor every Sunday. She was 78 now, still sharp as a knife, still running her investment portfolio from her Connecticut estate, even though she'd officially retired from Whitmore Technologies 15 years ago. The first time I showed up at her door, she'd looked at me for a long moment. "Cassandra," she'd said, not a question, a statement. "You finally left." I should have left sooner. No one else has visited me in 2 years, not since I stopped hosting Christmas. Then I'll visit every Sunday, if you'll have me. She'd smiled, and it was like looking at Mrs. Chen, Auntie Chen. The same warmth, the same sharpness. "I'll have you, darling. Come in. Tell me what you've been doing with that escape fund." For the next 2 years, every Sunday, I had tea with my grandmother. I told her about my company, my investments, my life. I never mentioned the Whitmores unless she brought them up first, and she rarely did. Instead, we talked about her life, her parents who'd immigrated from Taiwan, her struggles as a woman in tech, her pride in what she'd built. "I made a mistake," she told me once. "Letting your mother erase our name. Letting Robert take credit for my work. I did it because I loved Melissa, and I thought making her marriage work was more important than my legacy. But legacy isn't about names on buildings. It's about knowing who you are and where you come from." "You can still fix it," I'd said. "No, but you can." She'd squeezed my hand. "You're the only one who remembers Cassandra. You're the only one who cares." When grandmother Eleanor died at 83 suddenly and peacefully in her sleep, I was the one who found her. It was a Sunday. I'd brought Jasmine tea and almond cookies. She was in her chair by the window, looking out at her garden like she'd just fallen asleep. The funeral was huge. She'd been a tech industry legend, after all. The Whitmores sat in the front row playing The Grieving Family. Victoria wore designer black and cried prettily for the cameras. Mother gave a speech about her beloved mother that made me want to vomit. I sat in the back with Auntie Chen and cried real tears. The will reading was scheduled for 6 weeks after the funeral. In my first life, I'd been dead for 3 of those weeks. This time, I was very much alive, and I'd spent those 6 weeks preparing. 3 months before grandmother died, I'd gone to the courthouse and filed for a legal name change. It wasn't difficult. I was an adult, had no criminal record, and had a legitimate reason, reclaiming my maternal heritage. The judge signed off immediately. Cassandra Marie Whitmore ceased to exist. In her place was Arya Chen. I'd changed my driver's license, my passport, my bank accounts, my business registration. Everything. I'd notified NYU, my clients, everyone who mattered. The only people who didn't know were the Whitmores, because they never asked. They hadn't spoken to me in 5 years. I'd moved out at 18, and as far as they were concerned, I'd simply ceased to matter. Victoria had asked Mother once, in an email I'd seen when I hacked Mother's account, "Where's Cassandra these days?" Mother's response, "Who cares? She's probably teaching kindergarten somewhere." The contempt was so casual it didn't even register as cruelty to them. I was just that forgettable. Perfect. But I needed them to know I existed for one specific moment. I needed them to remember Cassandra Whitmore long enough to realize they'd forgotten her at the one moment that mattered. So I'd arranged the dinner. Not me, personally. I'd had Auntie Chen do it, through her role as grandmother's former household manager. She'd called Mother and said that grandmother had left instructions for a final family dinner at the estate before the will reading, and all grandchildren were required to attend. Required? Mother had apparently huffed. Eleanor is dead. She can't require anything. The will states that any beneficiary who doesn't attend forfeits their share, Auntie Chen had said smoothly. It was a lie, but Mother didn't know that. So here we all were, gathered in grandmother's dining room. The same room where we'd had Christmas dinners when I was a child, where I'd sat at the far end of the table, forgotten until someone needed something. Mother sat at the head in grandmother's chair, already presuming ownership. Father was on her right, checking his phone. Victoria was radiant in cream-colored silk, her engagement ring. 4 carats, I knew, because I'd heard her bragging to her friends, catching the light. Marcus was next to her, looking bored, and I was at the far end again, the forgotten end. To my darling daughters, Victoria and Mother's glass was raised, her face showing the first flicker of uncertainty I'd seen all night. "Oh, what is it again? Sarah? Susan?" "It's Cassandra, Mother," Victoria said. "Has been for 23 years." Victoria didn't look at me when she said it. None of them did. I was a placeholder, a space filler, someone who existed in the periphery. Right. To Victoria and Cassandra. And to Marcus, of course. To family, and to honoring Eleanor's memory by continuing the Whitmore legacy she built. I raised my glass and said nothing. Let them have this moment. Let them believe the Whitmore legacy was theirs. In 6 weeks, they'd learn the truth. But first, I had to survive this dinner without breaking character, because Cassandra Whitmore was meek, forgettable, easily dismissed. She didn't make waves. She accepted her place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. Arya Chen, on the other hand, was a completely different person. "So, Cassandra," Father said, finally acknowledging my existence as the staff served the first course. "What have you been doing with yourself? Still teaching?" "Something like that," I said quietly. "Teaching is so noble," Victoria said with false warmth. "I could never do it. All that patience and selflessness. You always were better at the nurturing roles. Some people are leaders and some people are supporters. Both are important." The condescension dripped from every word. Marcus snorted into his wine. "What about you, Victoria?" I asked. "How's the boutique?" Victoria's boutique, funded entirely by Father, was hemorrhaging money. I knew because I'd hacked their business accounts months ago. She was on track to lose $2 million this year alone. But Victoria just smiled. "Oh, it's wonderful. We're expanding to a second location in Soho. Daddy's been so supportive." She squeezed Father's arm. "I'm so lucky to have family who believes in me." The implication was clear, unlike you, who has no one. "That's wonderful," I said. "I'm sure Grandmother would be proud." A flicker of discomfort crossed Mother's face. Grandmother had actually hated Victoria's boutique, had called it a vanity project for a vapid girl in one of our Sunday conversations. But Mother recovered quickly. "Eleanor was proud of all her grandchildren," Mother said firmly. "She loved you all equally." Another lie, but I just nodded. The dinner continued like that. Painful small talk where my family members couldn't even be bothered to ask direct questions about my life, just made assumptions and moved on. I was teaching, I wasn't. I was probably dating some nice, boring man. I wasn't dating anyone. I was living in a small apartment somewhere forgettable. I owned a 3-bedroom condo in Brooklyn worth $2.3 million now, thanks to my investments. They created an entire life for me out of their assumptions and never once asked if any of it was true. By dessert, I could barely hold back my smile. "So," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "the will reading is Tuesday. Anyone want to place bets on how this shakes out?" "Marcus!" Mother's voice was sharp. "That's inappropriate." "Oh, come on. We all know Grandmother left everything to you, Mom. You were her only child. Maybe some trust funds for us grandkids, probably split evenly. Cassandra will finally be able to afford a real apartment." The table laughed. Not cruelly, just casually, like my poverty was an accepted fact. "I think," Victoria said, patting my hand with false sympathy, "Grandmother probably left you something special, Cass. Maybe her jewelry. You always liked those old-fashioned pieces." I remembered this conversation from my first life, too. They'd said almost the exact same things. And the first time, I'd sat here feeling grateful for even the possibility of scraps. Now I just smiled. "Maybe," I said softly. "Grandmother always was full of surprises." The will reading was held in the conference room of Morrison, Llewellyn and Associates, the law firm that had handled grandmother Eleanor's affairs for 40 years. Edmund Morrison himself, now 81 and still sharp, would be presiding. The Whitmores arrived in force, mother and father in their Mercedes S-Class, Victoria in her Range Rover, Marcus in his Tesla, a graduation present from father. They swept into the conference room like visiting dignitaries, all designer clothes and assumed authority. I arrived in an Uber. "Cassandra," Mother said, looking at me with faint surprise. "You're here?" "The invitation said all grandchildren," I said quietly. "Yes, of course, sit anywhere." I took a seat at the far end of the table again. Always the far end. Edmund Morrison entered with 2 associates and 3 bankers' boxes full of documents. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He'd known grandmother since the 70s, and he'd known exactly what she was doing with this will. "Thank you all for coming," Edmund said, sitting at the head of the table. "Eleanor Whitmore was a remarkable woman and a dear friend. I've had the privilege of knowing her for 52 years, and I can say without reservation that she was one of the most brilliant, principled people I've ever met." Mother smiled, expecting praise to transfer to her by proximity. "Eleanor left very specific instructions for this reading," Edmund continued, "and I'm bound by law and by my respect for her to follow them exactly. So I'll ask for your patience and attention as I read through her last will and testament." He opened the first document. The will was dated 6 months before grandmother's death, 2 months after I'd legally changed my name. Eleanor Chen Whitmore being of sound mind and body. The preliminaries took 10 minutes. Funeral arrangements already completed. Distribution of personal effects, jewelry to the Connecticut Historical Society, art collection to Yale, clothing and household items to various charities. Small bequests to staff, including $50,000 to my dear friend Angela Chen, who has served my family faithfully for 50 years. Auntie Chen, sitting in the corner as she'd been required to, didn't react, but I saw her hand clench her purse. Then Edmund reached the main distribution clause. "To my daughter, Melissa Chen Whitmore, I leave the sum of $1 and a copy of the original Chen family restaurant recipes, which I hope will remind her of who she was before she decided she was too good for her own blood." Mother's face went white. "What?" "To my son-in-law, Robert Whitmore, I leave the sum of $1 and my fervent hope that he chokes on it." Father shot to his feet. "This is outrageous." Edmund's voice never wavered. "To my grandson, Marcus Whitmore, I leave the sum of $50,000, which is far more than he deserves, given that he has not spoken to me in 3 years, but which I hope he will use for therapy to address his substance abuse issues." Marcus's face turned red. "I don't have—" "To my granddaughter, Victoria Whitmore, I leave the sum of $100,000 and a piece of advice. Real beauty comes from character, which you have never possessed and likely never will." Victoria made a choking sound. Her hands were shaking. "The remainder of my estate, including all assets, properties, investments, and intellectual property rights, I leave in its entirety to my beloved granddaughter, Cassandra Marie Whitmore, who was the only person in this family who loved me for myself and not for my money, who visited me every week for 2 years without being asked, who remembered my birthday, who knew my favorite tea and brought me almond cookies, who, alone among my descendants, cared about the Chen family legacy and the work I built from nothing." The room was silent. Even breathing seemed to have stopped. Then Mother laughed. It was a brittle, desperate sound. "Well, at least we know where it's going. Cassandra, dear, I hope you'll remember your family when— However," Edmund continued, his voice cutting through Mother's words like a blade, "there is a complication." Everyone looked at him. 3 months before Eleanor's death, she received notification that Cassandra Marie Whitmore had legally changed her name. Eleanor immediately contacted me to amend her will, but she passed away before we could execute the changes. Therefore, under the law, this bequest is to Cassandra Marie Whitmore, a person who no longer legally exists. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face carefully neutral. This was the moment. That's ridiculous, Father said. Shas, she's right there. She's Cassandra. No, Edmund said, looking directly at me. She's not. According to the legal documents filed with the New York County Clerk's Office, Cassandra Marie Whitmore changed her name on June 15th of this year to Aria Chen. Cassandra Marie Whitmore does not exist as a legal entity and therefore cannot inherit under this will. Victoria's face went from shock to dawning joy. So it goes to the family, to Mother. Not quite. Edmund opened another folder. Eleanor anticipated various contingencies. In the case that the primary beneficiary predeceases her or is unable to inherit, the estate passes to a named alternate. Who? Mother's voice was sharp. Angela Chen, Eleanor's sister-in-law and the last surviving member of the Chen family of Eleanor's generation. However, Ms. Chen has indicated that she wishes to disclaim her inheritance in favor of her great-niece. Auntie Chen stood. Her voice was clear and strong. I disclaim any inheritance from my sister Eleanor Chen Whitmore, and I direct that all assets pass to Aria Chen, previously known as Cassandra Marie Whitmore, who is my sister's granddaughter and the rightful heir to the Chen family legacy. Edmund nodded, which brings us to the codicil that Eleanor added to her will 2 years ago in anticipation of what she called the family forgetting Cassandra exists entirely. He pulled out another document, this one with grandmother's familiar handwriting on every page. Eleanor wrote, I know my family. I know they will forget my granddaughter the moment she stops being useful to them. I know they have already forgotten her name, her birthday, her existence. So I want to make this clear. I leave everything to the person who remembered me, who honored the Chen name, who understood that family is not about blood. It's about loyalty, love, and respect. I leave everything to my granddaughter, regardless of what name she carries, because she is the only one who ever bothered to learn my name before I married into the Whitmores. I was Eleanor Chen. I will always be Eleanor Chen, and my true heir is the one who understands that. Edmund looked up. Eleanor included extensive documentation proving that Cassandra Marie Whitmore and Aria Chen are the same person. Birth certificate, DNA records, witness statements, photographs spanning 23 years. And she included a clause stating that any name change by Cassandra was to be considered an affirmation of the Chen family heritage and should not disqualify her from inheritance. This is insane, Father shouted. We'll contest this. You can try, Edmund said calmly. But Eleanor had this will reviewed by 6 different attorneys, including a judge. It's ironclad. And she included a clause specifically about contests. Any beneficiary who challenges this will forfeit their individual bequest, and the estate will donate an equivalent amount to charities dedicated to elder abuse prevention in that person's name. Marcus slumped in his chair, realizing his $50,000 was about to disappear if Father pushed this. Aria Chen, Edmund said, looking at me. Do you accept this inheritance? I stood. Everyone stared at me like they were really seeing me for the first time. Yes, I said. My voice was steady. I accept. Then, as of this moment, you are the owner of the complete Eleanor Chen Whitmore estate, valued at approximately $370 million, including properties, investments, intellectual property rights, and the controlling interest in Whitmore Technologies. $370 million. It had grown in the years I wasn't there to inherit it the first time. Victoria made a sound like a wounded animal. There's one more thing, Edmund said. He pulled out a letter with my name, my new name on it. Eleanor left this for you. She asked that it be read aloud. He handed it to me. My hands shook as I opened it. Grandmother's handwriting filled the page, and I could hear her voice in every word. My darling Aria, if you're hearing this, it means you changed your name. Good. The Whitmores never deserved it anyway. The Chens built empires from nothing, and we don't need anyone else's name to be powerful. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you take control of everything I built, but I know you'll honor it. I know you'll remember where it came from. I know you'll never forget the way they forgot you. This money isn't just money. It's power. It's freedom. It's the ability to be who you truly are without apologizing to anyone. Use it well. Use it to build something beautiful. Use it to make sure no one ever forgets your name again. And if they do forget, change it again. Be whoever you want to be. But always remember, you're a Chen, and we are unforgettable. All my love, Grandmother Eleanor. I was crying by the end. Real tears, not the pretty ones Victoria had cried at the funeral. "You conniving little bitch," Victoria hissed. "You planned this." "I didn't plan anything," I said, looking at her directly. "I just stopped trying to make people remember me and started building a life with people who actually cared." "We're your family." "No," I said, "you're people who share my DNA." "Family is Grandmother Eleanor, who left me her entire estate. Family is Auntie Chen, who made me birthday cakes when everyone else forgot. Family is the people who knew my name without having to ask." "We'll sue," Mother said. Her voice was venomous. "We'll tie this up in court for years." "You can try, I said. "But I own Whitmore Technologies now. Controlling interest means I control the board, which means I can vote to change the name back to its original, Chen Technologies. I can restructure the company, remove all the Whitmore-associated patents, and dissolve your positions as consultants. I can effectively erase the Whitmore name from the company entirely." Father's face went purple. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." I gathered my things. "Actually, don't bother. Edmund, can you have the paperwork for the name change sent to the board of directors? I want it voted on next week." "Already prepared," Edmund said with a slight smile. I walked to the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mother, the Chen family restaurant, recipes Grandmother left you, those are actually priceless." She encoded the source code for the original restaurant management software in them, the software that became the foundation for everything Whitmore Technologies built. You might want to hold on to them. They're probably the most valuable thing you'll ever own if you can figure out how to read them. I left them sitting there, stunned into silence. Auntie Chen followed me out. In the hallway, she pulled me into a tight hug. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she whispered. "I know," I said. "I know she is." The next 6 months were a whirlwind of legal battles, board meetings, and restructuring. True to my word, I put forth a vote to rename Whitmore Technologies. It passed 7-2, with only Father's 2 loyal board members dissenting. Chen Technologies was reborn. I moved into Grandmother's Connecticut estate and converted it into my primary office. The penthouse in Manhattan I sold, Marcus had been planning to move into it, and I took great pleasure in selling it to a tech startup founder for twice its value and watching Marcus have to cancel his moving trucks. Victoria's boutique collapsed within 3 months. Without Father's financial backing, which dried up the moment I removed him from his consulting position at the company, she couldn't sustain the losses. The second location never opened. She had to declare bankruptcy and move back in with our parents. Speaking of our parents, they tried to sue. 3 different lawyers took their case and then dropped it when they realized how airtight Grandmother's will was. The last one told Father, in an email I definitely didn't hack into his account to read, "You don't have a case. Your mother-in-law left her money to the person she wanted to leave it to. The fact that you don't like it doesn't make it illegal." Marcus took his $50,000 and actually did go to rehab. He was the only one who called me, on my new number, which I'd had published in the will reading announcement specifically for this purpose. "Arya," he said, his voice was raw, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For forgetting, for being a shit brother." Grandmother was right about the substance abuse. "I've been using since sophomore year, and I never noticed that you weren't around because I was too high to notice anything." It wasn't enough, but it was something. "I accept your apology," I said. "But I'm not giving you any money, if that's what you're calling for." "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking, can I know you, the real you, not Cassandra, but Arya? Because I don't think I ever knew my sister at all." I thought about it. Get sober first. Actually sober, not just rehab sober, then we'll see. He said okay and hung up. I didn't know if he'd follow through, but at least he'd asked. The business press had a field day with the story. Tech heiress reclaims family legacy. The granddaughter who got everything. How Eleanor Chen built an empire. And how the Whitmores lost it. I gave exactly one interview to Forbes, and I made sure every word counted. My grandmother was a genius who built something extraordinary, I said. And she wanted it to go to someone who would honor where it came from. Not the Whitmore name, which was just a name my mother married into. The Chen name. The immigrant family who came here with nothing and built an empire through brilliance and hard work. That's the legacy I'm continuing. Some people have called your grandmother's will cruel, the interviewer said. Leaving your mother $1. My grandmother left my mother exactly what my mother gave her, nothing. My mother spent 30 years erasing the Chen name, pretending her family wasn't good enough, teaching her children to be ashamed of their heritage. She chose the Whitmore name over her own blood. So my grandmother chose her own blood over the Whitmore name. I don't think that's cruel. I think that's justice. The article went viral. I became briefly a very public figure. The press loved the Cinderella story, the forgotten granddaughter who inherited everything. They loved the name change, the immigrant legacy, the poetic justice of it all. I hated being public, but I used it strategically. I made sure everyone knew that Chen Technologies was building scholarships for first-generation college students, particularly those from immigrant families. I made sure everyone knew we were funding elder care facilities and programs to prevent family abandonment of elderly relatives. Every press release was a knife twist to my parents, and I enjoyed every single one. 1 year after grandmother's death, I hosted my own family dinner at the Connecticut estate. The guest list was small. Auntie Chen and her children, my cousins, who I'd gotten to know over the past year. 3 of grandmother's oldest friends, tech industry pioneers who'd known her in the 70s. Edmund Morrison and his wife, and Marcus, who'd been sober for 8 months and was working as a counselor at the rehab facility where he'd gotten treatment. We ate in the same dining room where I'd sat forgotten at so many Whitmore gatherings. But this time, the table was warm, full of people who knew my name, both of them. A toast, Auntie Chen said, raising her glass. To Eleanor Chen, who never forgot where she came from, and to Arya Chen, who brought us home. To Eleanor and Arya, everyone chorused. I looked around the table and felt something I'd never felt at a Whitmore gathering. Belonging. Thank you all for being here, I said, and for remembering my name. Auntie Chen smiled. How could we forget? You're unforgettable. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked through grandmother's house, my house now. I'd kept it almost exactly as she'd left it, except for one room, her study, where she'd worked on her programming and run her empire. I'd converted into something new. I'd lined the walls with photographs. Eleanor Chen as a young woman at Berkeley, fierce and brilliant in cat-eye glasses. Eleanor and David Chen at the opening of their first restaurant. Eleanor with Auntie Angela, both of them laughing. Eleanor receiving her first patent. Eleanor at charity galas, at tech conferences, at family gatherings before the Whitmores tried to erase the Chens. And in the center of the room, I'd placed a new portrait. Grandmother had sat for it a year before her death at my request. She was in her favorite chair, wearing a traditional Chinese cheongsam in deep blue silk, holding a photograph of her parents. The nameplate read, Eleanor Chen, 1941 to 2024, founder of Chen Technologies, mother, grandmother, unforgettable. I sat in the study and opened my laptop. Chen Technologies had just closed a major acquisition, a startup focused on AI-driven restaurant management, coming full circle to grandmother's original vision. The press release needed my approval before it went out tomorrow. I read through it, made a few edits, and hit send. Then I opened a different document, a list I'd been keeping for a year titled People Who Forgot. Victoria had tried to contact me 6 times in the past year, twice through lawyers demanding her fair share. Once through Marcus asking him to intercede, 3 times directly with emails that ranged from angry to pleading to venomous. I'd blocked her after the 3rd one. Mother had sent one email 3 months after the will reading. Subject line, an apology. I'd deleted it without reading it, If she couldn't remember my name at dinner, she didn't get to apologize now. Father hadn't contacted me at all. I'd heard through Marcus that he'd started drinking heavily and had been forced out of several boards due to erratic behavior. The Whitmore name, once so precious to him, was now associated with the man who'd lost a $300 million inheritance through sheer negligence. They'd forgotten my name. Now the world had forgotten theirs. I closed the list and opened a new document. I'd been working on something for months, a memoir of sorts. Not for publication, but for the record. So that someday, when people asked how Chen Technologies came back from being buried under the Whitmore name, they'd know the truth. I titled it, The Girl They Forgot, and I began to write. 2 years after grandmother's death, Chen Technologies went public. The IPO was the largest of the year, valuing the company at $12 billion. I kept controlling interest, but I sold enough shares to make me, on paper, one of the youngest billionaires in America. The press wanted interviews, tech conferences wanted me to speak, investors wanted meetings. I did the minimum necessary and spent the rest of my time actually running the company, building new programs, funding research. I also started a foundation, the Eleanor Chen Foundation for Forgotten Children. It provided resources for kids aging out of foster care, for children estranged from their families, for anyone who'd been overlooked or dismissed. The tagline was, "Everyone deserves to be remembered." The foundation's first major grant went to a program creating memory books for elderly people in nursing homes who no longer had family visitors. The second went to a scholarship program for students whose families didn't support their education. The third funded a legal aid clinic helping people escape abusive family situations. Every grant was personal. Every program was something I'd needed in my first life. On the 3-year anniversary of grandmother's death, I visited her grave. It was in the Chen family plot, not the Whitmore mausoleum. I'd had to buy the cemetery plot separately. The Whitmores had tried to block me from moving her, but I'd had the law on my side. She'd left specific instructions. Bury me with my parents, David and Eleanor Chen, not with the Whitmores. I placed almond cookies on her headstone like I'd brought her every Sunday. I did it, I told her. I built something you'd be proud of. I remembered where we came from, and I made sure no one will ever forget again. The wind rustled through the trees, and I imagined it was her voice. I know, darling. I always knew you would. I left the cemetery and drove back to the office. I had a board meeting in an hour, and then I was flying to Taiwan to visit the village where grandmother's parents had been born. I was planning to fund a new school there named after Eleanor Chen. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. 2 years sober today. Coffee next week? I texted back, congratulations. Yes to coffee. Another text. This one from an unknown number. This is Victoria. Please, I'm desperate. I have nothing. I'm your sister. I blocked the number. She was right that we shared DNA. But she was wrong about being my sister. Sisters remember each other's names. 5 years after grandmother's death, I got married. Her name was Dr. Sarah Martinez, and I'd met her at a foundation gala. She was a pediatrician who ran a clinic for uninsured children, and she'd been receiving grant funding from the Eleanor Chen Foundation for 2 years before we met in person. She had no idea who I was when we started talking. She thought I was just another donor, and that made me like her immediately. So what do you do? She'd asked. I run a tech company, I'd said. Oh, that's cool. Which one? Chen Technologies. She'd blinked. Wait, you're Arya Chen? The Arya Chen? Unfortunately, yes. She'd laughed. I've been emailing your foundation for years. I always assumed you were some old lady. I'm 28. I'm 32, and I'd love to buy you a drink and talk about how your foundation is literally saving lives in my community. We talked for 4 hours that night. She'd asked about my work, my vision for the foundation, my goals for Chen Technologies. She'd asked smart questions and challenged my assumptions. She'd also asked, halfway through the conversation, so what's the deal with your family? I read that Forbes article. Your family really forgot your birthday? They forgot my name, I'd said. Multiple times. That's unforgivable. Yeah, it was. But you're not angry anymore? I'd thought about it. I'm not angry. I'm free. We'd started dating a month later. She'd met Auntie Chen and Marcus and everyone who mattered. She'd listened to my stories about grandmother, about growing up forgotten, about dying and coming back. She'd believed all of it without question because, as she said, stranger things have happened, and I'm not going to invalidate your experience just because it's unusual. When I proposed, I'd done it in grandmother's study, in front of Eleanor's portrait. I want her blessing, I'd told Sarah. I think you have it, Sarah had said, looking at grandmother's painted smile. She would love that you found someone who sees you. The wedding was small. Auntie Chen walked me down the aisle. Marcus was there, 4 years sober and genuinely happy for me. Edmund Morrison came, and grandmother's old friends, and Sarah's huge, warm, loving family who'd adopted me as one of their own within minutes of meeting me. The Whitmores were not invited. I'd heard through Marcus that mother had tried to find out the date so she could surprise me by showing up. I'd hired security specifically to prevent that. Don't you think you should forgive them? Marcus had asked gently a few weeks before the wedding. It's been 5 years. Forgiveness isn't about time, I'd said. It's about whether someone deserves it. They haven't apologized, really apologized, not just, sorry, you're upset, apologized. They haven't changed. They haven't acknowledged what they did. They just want access to my money. Fair enough, Marcus had said. I just worry about you holding on to anger. I'm not angry, I'd said, and I'd meant it. I'm just done. There's a difference. On my wedding day, I wore a white cheongsam embroidered with gold dragons, traditional Chen family symbols. My something old was grandmother's jade bracelet. My something new was my wedding ring. My something borrowed was Auntie Chen's veil. My something blue was a note tucked into my shoe in grandmother's handwriting. Be happy, my darling. You deserve every good thing. Sarah and I honeymooned in Taiwan, visiting the Chen family village and the school I'd funded. We met distant relatives who were astounded and thrilled to learn about Eleanor and her legacy. They showed us old photographs, told us stories, fed us incredible food. This is your family, Sarah said, watching me laugh with a great aunt I'd just met. People who celebrate you. Yeah, I said, it is. 7 years after grandmother's death, I stepped down as CEO of Chen Technologies. Not because I was forced out or because the company was failing. The opposite. Chen Technologies was thriving, worth over $20 billion now, employing 30,000 people, leading the industry in ethical AI and sustainable tech. I stepped down because I'd done what I set out to do. I'd reclaimed the Chen name, I'd built something lasting, I'd honored grandmother's legacy, and I was tired of running a corporation. What will you do? The board asked when I announced my decision. I'm going to focus on the foundation, I said, and I'm going to write. I'd been working on a book for years, the memoir I'd started that night in grandmother's study. But it had evolved into something bigger, a history of the Chen family, of immigrant entrepreneurs, of women in tech, of the real story behind Chen Technologies that had been erased by the Whitmore name. I published it 2 years later under my full name, Unforgettable, The Hidden History of Eleanor Chen and the Women Who Built Tech, by Aria Chen. It became a bestseller, not because of the scandal or the inheritance drama, though the press certainly tried to focus on that, but because it was a genuine, well-researched history of pioneering women in technology who'd been written out of the narrative. Grandmother's story anchored the book, but I included dozens of others. Women whose husbands took credit for their work, women whose contributions were erased, women whose names were forgotten while men's names appeared on patents and buildings. This book is for everyone who was ever forgotten, I wrote in the dedication. Your names matter. Your stories matter. You are unforgettable. The book tour was exhausting and exhilarating. At every event, people came up to me with their own stories of being overlooked, dismissed, or erased. I listened to all of them. One woman, probably in her 70s, grabbed my hand after an event in San Francisco. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 15 years, she said. She married a man who convinced her I wasn't good enough for their new life. Your book. It helped me realize it's not my fault, and it's okay to let go. It is okay, I said. You deserved better. So did you, she said. I'm so glad you found it. 10 years after grandmother's death, I sat in the study I'd made from her old office, surrounded by photographs and memories. Sarah was downstairs making dinner. Marcus was coming over with his fiancée, a kind woman he'd met in his recovery program. Auntie Chen was in the kitchen helping Sarah, probably telling embarrassing stories about me as a child. My phone buzzed, an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject, from your mother. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. Arya, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this, but I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, maybe 6 months left, and I need to say this while I can. You were right about everything. I forgot your name because I'd forgotten my own. I erased the Chen family because I was ashamed of where I came from. I let your father erase my mother's legacy because I thought the Whitmore name would make me worth something. And I taught my children to forget you because remembering you meant remembering all my failures. You were the one who was like my mother, brilliant, determined, unbreakable, and I couldn't stand it. Every time I looked at you, I saw everything I'd given up to be a Whitmore. So I looked away. I'm sorry, it's inadequate and it's 10 years too late. But I'm sorry. I don't want your money. I don't want reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. You are your grandmother's heir in every way that matters, and the Chen legacy is in good hands. I hope you're happy. I hope you found the family you deserved. Melissa. Not mom, not mother. Melissa. I sat with the email for a long time, feeling nothing. No rage, no grief, no satisfaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement that it was too late. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. 3 months later, I read Melissa Chen Whitmore's obituary in the New York Times. It was short, perfunctory. It mentioned her marriage to Robert Whitmore, her children Victoria and Marcus. It mentioned that she was predeceased by her mother, Eleanor Chen Whitmore, founder of what would become Chen Technologies. It didn't mention me at all. I didn't go to the funeral, but I sent flowers, white chrysanthemums, traditional for mourning in Chinese culture. The card read, "In memory of Eleanor Chen's daughter, A.C. Let them wonder." Victoria sent me a vicious email after the funeral accusing me of disrespecting mother's memory by not attending. I blocked her for the 15th time. Father died 2 years later. Liver failure. I didn't send flowers to that funeral. 15 years after grandmother's death, I published my second book, The Girl They Forgot, a memoir. It was the full story. Growing up forgotten, dying alone, being reborn, reclaiming my name and my inheritance, building Chen Technologies into something grandmother would be proud of. I didn't hide anything. Not the abuse, not the neglect, not the names of the people who'd hurt me. "Won't this hurt your family?" my publisher asked. When they stopped being my family when they forgot my name, I said, "This is just the truth." The book was controversial. Some critics called it vindictive. Others called it cathartic. It sold 3 million copies in the first year. Victoria tried to sue me for defamation. Her lawyer dropped the case when I provided the evidence. Emails, recorded conversations, testimony from Auntie Chen and others. Everything I'd written was true, and I could prove it. The lawsuit was the last time I heard from Victoria. I don't know what happened to her after that. I didn't check. Marcus read the book and called me, crying. "I'm so sorry," he said. I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize how bad. "I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." "You were a kid too," I said. And you were dealing with your own stuff." "That's not an excuse." "No, but it's an explanation." I paused. "You've been in my life for 10 years now, Marcus. You've been sober, you've been kind, you've been a real brother. That counts for something. Does it count enough that you forgive me?" "Yeah," I said. "It does." 20 years after grandmother's death, I stood in the Eleanor Chen Center for Technology and Innovation, a new building at MIT funded by the Eleanor Chen Foundation. It housed programs for first-generation students, research labs for women in tech, and a museum documenting the history of immigrant contributions to technology. The center's opening ceremony was packed. Tech industry leaders, academics, politicians, and hundreds of students. Sarah stood next to me, our daughter, Eleanor, named for her great-great-grandmother, between us. She was 7 years old and had no memory of the Whitmores. She knew Auntie Chen as Grandma Angela and Marcus as Uncle Mark, and nothing about the family that had tried to erase us. She knew the Chen name meant innovation, legacy, perseverance. She knew her mother had built something important, and she knew, without question, that she was loved and remembered. "Mommy," Eleanor whispered as I prepared to give my speech. "Are you nervous?" "A little," I admitted. "Don't be. Grandma Eleanor is proud of you. I can feel it." I looked at my daughter, this impossible, perfect person who existed because I'd been given a second chance, and I believed her. I walked to the podium and looked out at the crowd. "My name is Arya Chen," I began. "And 20 years ago, my family forgot my name at a dinner. They forgot my birthday. They forgot I existed. But my grandmother, Eleanor Chen, for whom this center is named, never forgot. And because she remembered me, I'm standing here today." I told them the story. Not all of it, the rebirth part stayed private, but enough. The erasure of the Chen name, grandmother's secret will, the legal name change, the reclaiming of a legacy. "This center exists because one woman refused to let her family forget where they came from," I said. "And because when she was forgotten, she found her way home anyway. That's what I want this place to represent. You are not defined by the people who forget you. You are defined by the people who remember, and by the legacy you build for yourself." The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous, clutching a copy of my memoir. "Ms. Chen," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. I'm estranged from my family. They disowned me when I came out as trans. And your book, it helped me realize I could build a new family. I could choose my own name and my own legacy." "What's your name?" I asked. "Jade," she said. "Jade Chen, actually. I took your family name when I changed mine legally. I hope that's okay." I pulled her into a hug. "It's more than okay. Welcome to the family." Behind me, Manantai felt rather than saw grandmother's presence. Not literally, I didn't believe in ghosts, but I felt her approval, her pride, her love. We'd done it. We'd made sure no one would forget. The story ends here, but the legacy continues. Chen Technologies is still thriving, now run by a brilliant CEO I mentored personally. The Eleanor Chen Foundation has helped over 100,000 forgotten children find their way. My books are taught in universities. The center at MIT graduates hundreds of students every year. And me? I'm 60 now, gray-haired and happy. Sarah and I split our time between the Connecticut estate and a small house in Taiwan, near the Chen family village. Eleanor is grown with children of her own, my grandchildren, who know every story about their great-great-great-grandmother Eleanor and carry the Chen name with pride. Marcus is still in my life, still sober, still trying to make amends through action rather than words. He runs a recovery center now funded by the foundation. Victoria, I heard, moved to Europe somewhere. I don't know details. I don't want to. The Whitmore name barely exists anymore. When people hear it, they think of cautionary tales about inheritance lost and legacies squandered. But the Chen name? The Chen name is unforgettable. I keep a photo on my desk. Grandmother Eleanor at 25, standing in front of Chen's Golden Dragon, her first restaurant. She's smiling, fierce and proud, wearing a name tag that says, Eleanor Chen, owner. She knew who she was, and she made sure I learned who I was too. They forgot my name at a family dinner, so I changed it legally and completely. I became someone they could never forget, someone who would make sure they were forgotten instead, and I lived happily ever after the end.